The night America realized power was not enough. The war had already been decided when the first American soldier stepped onto the beach. He didn't know that yet. The Atlantic was black, flat, and cold, the kind of cold that crept through boots and into bone. Dawn was still an idea rather than a reality, a thin gray promise on the horizon. The ramp of the landing craft dropped with a metallic scream, and men ran forward into gunfire that sounded like tearing steel. Some fell immediately, some kept moving without knowing why. A few would live long enough to remember the smell of cordite, salt water, and blood for the rest of their lives. At that moment, none of them were thinking about ideology, geopolitics, or the future of American power. They were thinking about survival. Yet history had already chosen them. World War II would later be remembered as a clean story: freedom versus tyranny, good versus evil, democracy triumphing through sacrifice. That version would be printed in textbooks and replayed in speeches. But the truth, buried beneath classified documents and sealed warehouses, was darker, stranger, and far more unsettling. America did not merely win the war. America learned something from it. And that lesson would change the world forever. By 1943, the United States had become an industrial miracle. Factories that once produced refrigerators and automobiles now produced bombers and tanks at a pace the world had never seen. The American military was not just large, it was relentless. Liberty ships slid into the ocean faster than German submarines could sink them. Airfields appeared overnight. Entire cities of steel and concrete rose where farmland had been only months earlier. But deep inside the Pentagon, a quieter realization was forming. Raw power was not enough. The German army was retreating, yes, but it was retreating intelligently. Soviet forces were bleeding their way westward. Japan, cornered in the Pacific, was fighting with a discipline and fanaticism that defied Western logic. And everywhere American intelligence officers went, they encountered the same unsettling pattern. The enemy often knew more than expected. Someone was thinking ahead. In Europe, American units began encountering abandoned facilities that did not look like ordinary military installations. Underground laboratories, half-destroyed factories with unusual machinery, filing cabinets burned hastily, not to destroy evidence of crimes, but to destroy ideas. In one such complex, an American officer stood alone on a factory floor while his men secured the perimeter. The machines were intact, precision engineered, years ahead of anything he had seen back home. He understood in that moment that Germany had not only fought a war with weapons, it had fought with minds. The United States entered World War II believing that moral clarity and industrial strength would carry it through. It left the war understanding something far more dangerous, that the future belonged to whoever controlled knowledge. This realization did not come with a press release. It came in silence. Even as Allied forces liberated concentration camps and documented horrors beyond comprehension, American intelligence teams were operating under a different mandate. They were not looking backward at atrocities. They were looking forward. Special units followed the front lines, not to fight, but to search. They were given access that even combat commanders did not fully understand. Their orders were vague but urgent. Secure documents, locate personnel, preserve research. These teams did not wear distinctive insignia. Their mission names would not appear in newspapers. Years later, even veterans who had served alongside them would argue about whether they had existed at all. But they did, and they were changing the rules of war.
In Washington, senior military planners faced a dilemma that would haunt American policy for decades. The United States had lost hundreds of thousands of lives. Millions more had been wounded or scarred psychologically. The American public wanted closure, justice, a clean ending. But the emerging reality was that justice and advantage were not always aligned. Germany's defeat revealed something terrifying. Much of its scientific and military research was not destroyed. It was scattered, hidden, portable, and dangerously useful. Rocket technology, aeronautics, chemical research, advanced medicine, intelligence methodologies refined under total war. If America did not act quickly, someone else would. The Soviets were already moving. While tanks still burned in European fields, American officers sat in closed rooms and debated questions that would never appear in campaign speeches. Was it possible to separate knowledge from the crimes committed to obtain it? Could a nation founded on ideals afford to ignore an advantage simply because it was morally compromised? What would happen if the United States chose not to learn from its enemy? The answers to these questions were not unanimous, but history favors decisiveness. By the time the war in Europe officially ended in May 1945, a second, quieter war had already begun. It did not involve armies. It involved files, personnel, and secrets. American transport planes lifted off under cover of darkness, carrying cargo that never logged in public manifests. Names were changed, records rewritten, entire pasts erased with a signature and a stamp. Some of the men on board had worn enemy uniforms months earlier. They were now assets. This was not a betrayal of victory, American officials told themselves. It was a continuation of it. Back home, the American public celebrated. Parades filled streets. Soldiers returned with medals and silence. Families rebuilt lives interrupted by global catastrophe. The country felt invincible, united by the belief that it had saved the world. And in many ways, it had. But beneath the surface, the United States was transforming into something new. A permanent military power. A nation that no longer demobilized completely after war. A state that understood secrecy as a strategic necessity. The atomic bomb would soon make headlines, but it was not the only revolution underway. Intelligence agencies expanded. Military research budgets exploded. The line between civilian science and military application blurred almost overnight. America was no longer reacting to threats. It was preparing for ones that did not yet exist. In 1947, the structure of American power was quietly rewritten. New institutions emerged, designed not for declared wars, but for uncertainty, for influence, for shadows. The lessons of World War II had been absorbed and institutionalized. Never again would the United States enter a global conflict intellectually unprepared. Never again would it underestimate the value of information. Never again would it assume that victory alone guaranteed security. Or so it believed. Years later, veterans would sit in quiet rooms and admit that something had changed after the war, not just geopolitically, but morally. The enemy had been defeated, yet the tension never fully disappeared. It lingered, reshaped, redirected. The battlefield had moved, and America had followed it. What began on blood-soaked beaches ended in sealed rooms and classified decisions. Decisions whose consequences would echo through Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, and beyond. World War II did not end America's war mindset. It refined it. And the United States would spend the rest of the 20th century living with what it had learned.